Next we'll work on section 4. This is the tallest section, and it's all medium weight chipboard, and on the listing it's down here at the bottom of the first page of medium weight chipboard. All the pieces are listed there. And then we have a template, just one page. It's on page 5 of 8. Now, because these pieces are so tall, I can't get them to scale or life size on this piece of paper. So these red lines just indicate that it's a cut off. So here on this part, on all 4 pieces, we're going to cut out this little 1-inch window. It is down 1 inch from the top, and it is centered so that it has a 1/2 inch space on either side, and it's 1 inch tall. So I'm going to do that on all 4 pieces. So here are the 4 sides with the top windows cut in them, and I'll just put 2 of them off to the side because now we're going to cut these notches for the box that's on the inside, and we'll only do that on 2 of the pieces. This is similar to the box number 1 that we had in section 3. We measure up from the bottom 3 inches, and then it's 1.5 inches on the open edge, and it's only 1 inch tall on the inside edge. The difference here is because these pieces are narrower, we're only cutting in 1.25 inches for the notch, leaving a 3/4 inch space here. So I'll do that on 2 pieces, and I'll have the mirror image there. So that is all the preparatory cutting done for section 4. Before we join the walls together, I want to put some vellum or tracing paper behind each of the 4 windows. So in the materials guide it calls for a strip of paper that's 1.5 inches by 6, which will cut into 4 squares that are 1.5 inches. And then we can put some score tape around the inside of each one of these windows and fasten them down. So I'll go ahead and get my shapes cut, and then I'll be back. So I've just turned my walls upside down so that the ends I'm working on are closer to me, and I've put some 1/4 inch score tape around each one of the openings, and then I can just take one of my squares and put that in place and burnish that on there. And I'll repeat that for the other ones. Now that I have my window panes on, I can go ahead and join these together. I'm not going to make it 3-dimensional, I'm just going to join them 4 in a row just like this. And I'll use my joining strips again. I can run full length on these, and here I'll just cut 2 pieces to fit. Now it's time for some ledger strips, and I've cut 6 at 1.75 inches, and I've cut 2 at 1.5 inches. Now on my assembly here, I have my open joining strip on the left side. You might have yours on the left or on the right. Wherever there is not a joining strip on, so for me it's this one on the right, that's where I'm going to use my 1.5 inch ledger strips, and then on the other panels that have joining strips on them, I'll use the 1.75 inches. Now at the bottom, we'll again hang back a 1/16 of an inch up above the bottom edge, and I'll use the, like I said, the 1.75 inches on these 3 panels, and then for the 1.5 inches, I'm just going to hold it back about 1/2 inch, or at least 3/8 of an inch from the open end. And that'll allow room for that joining strip to come in. And it just comes, again, the 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom. So I'll go ahead and put these 4 on. Now at the top, we won't have a top piece here. We're just going to have a platform because we're going to put a LED tea light to light up our windows. And so I'm going to measure a line down from the top that is 2 3/4 inches from the top. So just put this on my craft mat, get it straight here, and mark down a line 2 3/4 from the top. Now that I have that line drawn, I'll take my ledger strips and put them below that line but touching it. So right up to that line but below it. And for the little 1.5" one, I'll again use that over here on this last panel, and I'll hold it back at least 3/8 of an inch from the open edge. Then we need some ledger strips around our opening. I've cut these 1.25 inches, and I'll hold them back a 1/16 of an inch from that edge. Now remember to leave a little gap in between where this fold is going to be. So a 1/16 of an inch above the angled edge and below the square edge down here. We don't need them on the sides. And once you have all the ledger strips on there, make sure you give them a good burnish. One more thing to do before we join to put this in the round is to mark our center panel. Now this center panel, as you can see, is much shorter than the whole section, but because we only need it to go up far enough to be the back for the hole here. So I'm going to first start by finding and marking a center line down the middle of the panel. And once I have that center line marked, I'm just going to line it up with the bottom of my building, and then I've got the center line right in between these two panels, and then I can trace out the roof lines, ceiling lines, and the floor line. And then, just so we don't forget, we're going to trim a 1/16 of an inch off the bottom of this piece. And we can add our ledger strips to the center panel in a few minutes. So now we can join this to make it three-dimensional. Just remove that last score tape backing, and these sides should just butt together, fold in together. And then reach in as best you can and give that last join a good burnishing with your bone folder. Now we can add our ledger strips to our center panel, and I'll cut this one about, the bottom one about 2 1/4, and I'll use 1 1/4 for the top two. I'm going to erase this center mark before I start, just so that it's easier to get to. And then the bottom one goes a 1/16 of an inch below the line, and the top two go a 1/16 of an inch above the line. Make sure you don't have anything hanging over the edge, and in fact you could probably just cut a little bit of that off so it won't get too close to the edge here. I just trimmed it a little bit. And then I'm going to erase my lines here in the center. And just do a little test fit here. That's going to fit in there fine. And what we'll do this time is we'll get one of our we've got two pieces that are 2 inches by 2 inches. They're marked for the base and the platform. We'll have one of these ready because we'll glue in the center panel first, but just as soon as we get it in there, we'll want to put the base platform piece in so that we make sure everything stays nice and square. So this piece comes up about halfway, and it may be tricky to get glue into. We want to put glue into the corners on the edges here, and just do your best to get glue into there. So I could reach in from the bottom a little bit with my big gluer, and then I went in through the hole with my detail gluer, and I've got glue up pretty much the whole way. Now when this panel goes in, the bottom of it should be even with the bottom of the ledger strips. So that's why we cut that 1/16 of an inch off. Just squeeze that to begin with and then put it in, keeping it even with those ledger strips. And then just give it a squeeze and then put some glue along the ledger strips. And you can also put some glue on the bottom of that center, and then put the base in. And I'm going to put a rubber band around that to hold that. And then I'll reach in and put my finger on this ledger strip. I'll put it flat on the table and put my finger on this ledger strip to make sure that center panel is seated all the way down to the bottom. And then if you have a nice tight fit against that square base, you'll know that your section is nice and square as well. So I'm going to let that set up and dry for a few minutes. Now we're ready to put the floor and the ceiling into our opening here, and we'll start with the floor. And I've got a 2-inch square here that I'm going to cut the diagonal on. We only need one side, and we'll do a dry fit here. Just kind of wiggle it in and see if it fits. Now on mine that fits fine. If yours is too snug, then you can take it out and take a little sliver off of this long side here. But if it fits just right, go ahead and put some glue on your ledger strips and put it in. Now we can work on our ceiling, and this one we do similar to how we did the slanted ceiling on section number 3. This rectangle is 1 3/8 inches by 1 5/8 inches, so I'll start by cutting that diagonal. Now I've cut my diagonal. I'm going to put the two shorter sides together, the 1 3/8 inches side, and I'll join them with a cardstock joining strip. Make sure you give that joining strip a good burnish and cut off any excess. And we'll fold this and do a little dry fit here. That's a good fit, so I'm going to just pull it down a little bit, far enough so I can get glue on my ledger strips and then glue it in. And just like before, I'm going to put that corner in first, that leading corner, and then push the two sides up. I'll put a rubber band on there just to kind of hold it in place, and then I'm going to reach down with my detail gluer and put some glue on those ledger strips and pop in the other 2-inch piece that we had that was labeled base or platform. And I'll put another rubber band up there at the top to hold that nice. And then I'll just put it upside down on my craft mat, and everything should be nice and square. It's going to be about 2 1/8 on the sides. The little corners are out because, you know, we just have the kissing corners. We don't have overlapping corners. So I'll let that dry for a little while. Now this next step is optional. It's just the little side pieces like we did on the inside of box 3. I've again got 4 little pieces here, and the ones that are going to go in the back, I'll again kind of angle off that corner a little bit just so that it won't have an issue fitting back into that wall. Again, I'll put my glue on the back wall and then put this piece on the back to act as a little support. Make sure that you get them all the way into the corners on each side. So I'll do that. Then I'll run my glue along the edge of that strip back in the back there and on the inside of this opening, and I'll put my little wall in place. Now there is a tiny little gap up at the top and the back, but unless you're sticking your head down inside of there, you really won't notice it, and it's just a little too complicated, I think, to figure out what that angle is. So that's the little insides of the walls. The roof for section 4 is removable so that we can get to the LED tea light to turn it off and on. And it has a part that fits inside of the building and then a pyramid on the top. And we're going to start by making that part that fits inside of the building. It's a box. And so the cutting guide calls for 2 pieces that are 2 by 2 for the roof base and top, and then some little 3/8 inch wide pieces. Now at 2 inches it's just a little snug to fit inside of that building and come out easily. You can do it, but it becomes a little tricky. So we're going to actually cut a sliver, a 1/16 of an inch sliver off of 2 adjacent sides, so that we'll end up having a square that is really 1 15/16. So I'm going to do that for each of my squares. Now that we've made that little correction, we can go ahead and build our box. I'm going to start with one of the pieces and run a bead of glue along the edge on the top. I'll take one of my longer pieces. I already cut these to 1 15/16. The cutting guide has been updated to show that. Make sure that that's fitting right end to end and standing straight up. And then run a bead of glue on the 2 adjacent sides, and also a little bit on the insides of those ends, and then take a short piece and butt it up against each one of those sides. Now these should be a 1/16 of an inch shorter than that base piece that we have. Right down there at the end, I think you can see there's a 1/16 of an inch gap there, and that's because when this last piece comes in, it'll fill in that gap. Now you can run glue along the top edge on the last side and the 2 little ends, and put the final 1 15/16 inch piece on, and you'll have a nice little box. And to close up the box, we'll run a bead of glue around the top edges and then pop on our other piece that we trimmed to 1 15/16 inch square. Now you can test fit this inside. hold on to it, don't let it go down inside of the box, but it should fit nicely in there so that it can easily come out, but it doesn't slide around too much. Next, we'll take the piece that's marked for the roof sides, and we're going to cut this into a series of triangles, and they each have a 2.5 inch base. So I'm going to measure along on the bottom 2.5 inches once, and then 2.5 inches again. And on the top, I'm going to measure over half of 2.5, which is 1 1/4. And then from that 1 1/4 inch mark, I'll mark 2.5 twice. And then I'll connect these dots to make 4 triangles. So here are my 4 triangles, and I've got their 2.5 inch bases here, and I'm going to join them with joining strips and just butt their side edges up together till I have a unit like this. Then once you have a unit like that, go ahead and put one more joining strip on and close this to make a pyramid. Make sure you reach in and burnish really well on all of those joining strips. Now we have our 2 parts of our roof built, and on the little rectangular base, right along the edge, I'm going to run a nice, pretty decent sized bead of glue. It doesn't have to be carried away, but just a decent sized bead of glue. And then take the pyramid and look straight down and get that centered and pushed down on top of that base. And once you have it pushed down, just pick it up and make sure it looks like it's sitting in there nice and square. And then I'm going to let that thoroughly dry. And once that lid is thoroughly dry, you can do a little test fit on the top of your section 4, and it should fit on there nicely. And that is the construction for section 4.